You know, they say one man's trash becomes another man's treasure. I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this week's waiver wire list. Then again, sometimes one man's trash just becomes another man's trash. I also want you to keep that in mind. We did have one breakout performance from a running back who finally got his shot. We do have a rookie who looks like he's on the verge of breaking out that you might want to grab now if you can. And then we have, for the first time, several repeats. Yeah, guys that you picked up, you may have dropped, stashed, maybe you forgot about. It's time to get back in on them. But you know what we say, and it's always true, the first thing that drives your decisions, whether it's for your lineup, your waiver wire, whatever, it's injuries, right? Football is just a war of attrition. And here we go with the injury report heading into week 7. I mean, unlike last week, there were a few big names that hit the injury report this week. And so got to start with Puka Nacua. This one is going to be tricky because on the one hand, we all saw right pretty early in that game, he went out in obvious pain, went to the locker room, but then he came back. But then he didn't catch a ball and he didn't really do anything after coming back. And so it's clear that he really shouldn't have come back at all, even tried to play. But it doesn't matter because he basically did nothing. And now Sean McVay himself is saying, as far as next week's game, which is going to be in London, by the way, unsure what his status is going to be. So all week long, we're going to have to sit here and wonder if the number one player in all of fantasy football up until this point is even going to suit up. So I'll circle back to this at the end to see a possible replacement, as if there's a way to replace Puka in your lineup. But, you know, we've got to do what we've got to do. But keep in mind, this is why we do the live streams almost every single day, and especially on the weekends, because what we say early in the week can definitely change as we get closer to Sunday. One thing we want to change is our subscriber count. Let's get it up there. We're almost to 100K. We've been growing fast just this season alone. Keep it going. If you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, maybe it's your first time watching or you just haven't thought about doing it, take a second right now and click that button. We definitely appreciate it. And the next big injury was Emeka Egbuka, stud rookie wideout for Tampa Bay. I mean, they're just falling one after the other. First Mike Evans, and then just when Chris Godwin came back, he didn't play this week. And so, of course, you know, like you've got to start Egbuka. And so, of course, he gets hurt too. Yeah, that means the top 4 wideouts for this Tampa Bay Bucks team are all on the shelf, and they might be without all of them this coming week. I mean, who even knows? It was a hamstring injury for Egbuka. He was ruled out pretty quickly, didn't come back, and so now we just get to play the waiting game. The good news is for Baker Mayfield owners that he really does not care who he faces, who he's throwing to. It doesn't matter for this guy. Now, with Marvin Harrison Jr., we were a little bit worried because he was going to be without Kyler Murray, Jacoby Brissett, backup quarterback, veteran, was out there. It didn't matter because Marvin Harrison barely played. In fact, early in that game, he left with a suspected concussion after his head slammed on the turf there pretty hard, and again, ruled out, didn't come back. It looked as if when he was on the way to the locker room, he was frustrated, like he wanted to be out there, but of course, they're going to be extra cautious, especially with their best offensive player there. So this is going to be the typical protocol. We're going to have to wait and see how he does throughout the week. Just keep in mind, we're still not going to know Kyler's status next week, and it's going to be a super tough matchup for the Cardinals before their bye. They get to play that Packers defense. If you had the misfortune of watching the Jets-Broncos game over in Europe, first of all, condolences. You really should just watch our live stream instead. Would have been a lot more entertaining and informative. But one thing you may have noticed is Garrett Wilson, besides not being super happy with the coaching staff based on the way they ended that first half, understandably so, well, he was in and out of the tent at one point, and then after the game, Aaron Glenn, in as vague terms as possible, said that he is dealing with an injury. Don't know what the injury is or when he suffered it or anything else. That's pretty much it. This is pretty cryptic and non-specific and non-helpful. I don't know if this is something to worry about. I think we have enough worries with the state of the Jets offense in and of itself. We're probably beyond worrying about the Titans offense. We've just given up on this season already again. And Calvin Ridley being hurt doesn't help. It was the hamstring for him. And, you know, it's just one thing after another with this team. But anyways, Ridley, just when it looked like he was back to maybe being relevant, he missed most of that game, including the second half. We'll keep an eye out to see if he's ready to go for next week. And similarly, just when we saw David Njoku come back last week with some decent numbers, with new quarterback Dylan Gabriel behind center, David Njoku left this game. At first thought it was a thigh, but then they said it's a knee injury. That doesn't sound good. We don't know the severity of it, though. Of course, we'll find out more details as the week goes on. But hey, this might actually be a good thing for fantasy, at least provide clarity, because this definitely opened the door again for Harold Fannin, and I'll address that in just a couple minutes. And then finally, there was another Ram that got hurt. Not as important here, but Blake Corum with an ankle injury also left right after Puka did. And so it wasn't a smash spot for Kyron Williams here. I mean, he scored and he was fine. But hey, with Corum out of the way and maybe Puka questionable here, and Kyron Williams is going to have to carry a bigger load. All right, the top waiver wire pickups for week 7. Now, usually we separate these. I'll talk about some high priority ads that are less likely to be available, kind of a higher ownership rate above 50%. Honestly, at this point of the season, we're several weeks in, contenders and pretenders are starting to separate, but a lot of these players that have actually been productive or even have a chance, they're already owned so highly that you're probably just not getting them. So I'm going to talk about one player real quick before I'll say, these are the players you're probably actually fighting for on waiver wires, and that's Matthew Golden. Now, Matthew Golden didn't have a huge game statistically. He had his best game of the season, still didn't find the end zone, but we started to see him actually get used in more encouraging ways. Now, Golden was definitely behind Romeo Doubs in terms of targets. Doubs had 9, Golden had 5, which tied for second on the team, but he led the team in receiving yards, 86 yards on just 3 catches, and he actually got 2 carries. So they're starting to use him in a little bit more creative ways, kind of like the way that they had been using Jaden Reed when he was actually healthy. So this is good. Again, that downfield ability, that's what they got Golden for, that speed. Still missing Christian Watson. Who knows if he's coming back real soon, if he's even going to be close to 100%. But Golden had been getting separation. All the numbers were there. It's like it was pointing to a potential breakout. And so even though it was a Cincinnati defense and there was a shot here, again, it wasn't a big game, but it's like at least we're seeing that steady improvement, that steady involvement. That's what you want to see. Remember, the Packers just came off of their bye. You don't have to worry about that. This is a guy that always has that high upside. Maybe you can plug and play and flex and hope he actually does find the end zone. All right, but I know who everyone's really going to be fighting for over the waiver wire. Of course, it's this week's not rookie, but running back breakout who finally had his first good game. It was Kamani Vidal. Yeah, the Chargers running back situation settled itself pretty quickly and, pretty assuredly here. Of course, we thought all along, because we were told by sources that we should never ever believe, but it just made sense. Hassan Haskins was going to be the guy, right? Hassan Haskins was in the active roster. Kamani Vidal was in the practice squad. We saw Vidal last year do nothing basically in his rookie season. Didn't even average close to 4 yards a carry. Was barely involved. They had no hopes for him this season. They weren't even going to use him only because Najee Harris is out for the season. Only because Amarian Hampton is done. He's on IR for several weeks at least. And so only because of that was Vidal even brought up. And then he took the lead. Now, I truly believe this wasn't the plan necessarily going in. Hassan Haskins kind of started out with, the first team there, and he was getting carries early. They were mixing and matching. It was kind of a hot hand thing. Vidal was just better as a runner, and that shouldn't be surprising. Look, we were pretty optimistic about Vidal last year. We thought this guy has the potential, even though he wasn't an early pick. He's speedy, he's got athleticism, he can catch the ball. It just didn't come together. And so finally, this game, given the chance, he made it happen. So in this game against the Dolphins, Vidal saw a 63% snap rate. He was out there running a route half of the time, and 18 of the 24 carries between the two running backs. Again, not at all what we expected. We thought if anything, it would be close to 50-50. Maybe even Hassan Haskins would have the lead. Maybe Vidal's a little more effective. He pretty much dominated the touches here. And really the craziest part is, despite the fact that Haskins is the bigger back, Vidal's kind of a small guy, in the red zone, it was mostly all Vidal. 6 of the 7 carries in the red zone went to Vidal. All last season, Vidal had a total of 155 yards rushing. Just in week 6 of the 2025 season, 124 yards rushing. It's clear to say there's a difference here in this running back. It looks like he's going to be the guy. Now, that said, we do have to, as always, kind of have a reality check here. Keep in mind, what did we see last week with a guy like Michael Carter? Clearly the lead back, especially in the early downs, even the short yardage. I feel like I'm repeating everything I said last week with Michael Carter. It's like, all right, he's going to be the guy for now. And then what happened this week? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's demoted for Bam Knight. Why? I don't know. Hassan Haskins and Bam Knight are very similar type of players, and there's no reason that they should be the lead back necessarily, and there's no reason that Kamani Vidal shouldn't be. But keep in mind that NFL head coaches do some weird things. So again, I'm not dumping 100% of my fab to get Kamani Vidal. Martin Hampton will be back, hopefully, in a few weeks when he's ready. And so, again, don't go crazy here, but of course, if you need a running back, he's going to be your top priority. Now, if you need a wide receiver, well, maybe you can just do what I can do in several of my leagues. Just look to your own bench and all the points that Wan'Dale Robinson left for you there. Wan'Dale was a big waiver wire add after week 2 when he and then quarterback of the New York Giants, Russell Wilson, went ballistic against the Chiefs. And then, of course, what happened? A whole lot of nothing. Even when Jackson Dart came in, we thought, okay, this benefits a guy like Wan'Dale, right? Those short targets, nothing for Wan'Dale. So, of course, on a Thursday night against the defending champions, you already know what happened. Wan'Dale Robinson had himself a game. In the previous 3 games since that huge game against Kansas City, Wan'Dale had a total of 70 receiving yards, right, across 3 games. So in week 6, he gets you 84 yards on 6 catches and a touchdown. Now, I will say, this is more in line with what you should expect as opposed to the previous couple of weeks, like even with this transition to Jackson Dart, right? This just makes sense. He should be the leading target on this team because who else do they have? Malik Neighbors done for the season. Darius Slayton was out with a hamstring injury. And despite that, and Slayton was hurt last week, and it didn't really benefit Wan'Dale, but this week it came together because I guess they just wanted to make sure that he was part of the game plan because honestly, what else do they have? Now, to some extent, also, he did benefit from the fact that, the Eagles were down a couple of players. That includes their top corner, Quinyon Mitchell. Not that Wan'Dale is a guy he would have shadowed necessarily, but again, the Eagles just did not look like they were ready for that game at all. Jackson Dart clearly was. As always, I'm going to tell you the most encouraging number here is target share. Wan'Dale as the leading target for this team, and that is sustainable because who else would it be? And so Wan'Dale Robinson, yeah, he's a guy that you can always just flex and see what he gets you. I don't love him next week, I'll be honest, because they're going to be on the road against the Broncos, that defense. And look, as bad as the Jets are offensively, they're really bad, but also the Broncos made them look bad. The Broncos are one of the best defenses out there, leading the league in sacks at this point. So I don't feel great about the Giants' prospects, but then again, I didn't feel great about them last week either. Another guy who took a 3-week hiatus, actually a little bit longer, was Kayshon Boutte. Yeah, this was supposed to be another big Diggs week, right? Everyone all in on Diggs. It's all Diggs. And no, not this week. Back to Boutte. Yeah, Josh McDaniels made the call, went back to Boutte because this is how the Pats offense apparently is going to operate. We've seen this now, and this is what he does. They're going to change who they feature almost every week. Week 1, it was the receivers. It was Boutte and Diggs. And then it was all Hunter Henry. And then it was like, no, we're going to throw it to the running backs. And then back to Diggs. And then this week, it's back to Boutte. Oh, and Demario Douglas. Like, everybody's going to get a turn here. Except Travion Henderson, of course. Look, we can't ignore Kayshon Boutte now. 93 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game alone. And that was on 5 receptions, getting those big chunk plays. Again, showed flashes of a breakout until they decided to basically just stop throwing it to him. This is going to be one of those players that you really wish, or maybe you're glad that you drafted somehow in best ball because you reap the benefits without having to worry about whether to start him. He's going to be frustrating if you actually depend on him because you just don't know, right? And honestly, it's going to be that way, I think, all season with this New England offense. They're going to specifically and intentionally use different guys in different situations, and I don't think it's even going to be based necessarily on the matchup. But I will buy into this because we've seen that he's done this now multiple times this season, and I do feel good about Boutte next week because they get the Titans. Now, if you're still just aggravated by the fact that Brock Bowers still out, George Kittle hasn't come back, you got one of those early tight ends, you're still regretting it, except for maybe Trey McBride. He's pretty much the only one. All right, but good news is there's still some good tight ends out there, and now maybe a clear favorite for Cleveland between those two. I know last week I just talked up David Njoku. Well, guess what? Then David Njoku got hurt, and so now it's Harold Fannon's time again. Maybe. In just the second game for Dylan Gabriel in the NFL, Harold Fannin was the leading receiver for the Browns, caught 7 passes and 81 yards. Interestingly enough, he got 10 targets, which it is a lot. You realize, though, that Gabriel somehow threw the ball 52 times in this game. Possibly more amazing is that on 52 passes, he totaled 221 yards. It's not a lot. And Jerry Jeudy was actually the leading target in this game. 13 times got targeted. He only caught 5 of those 13 targets. Another bad drop, some more routes that just looked like they weren't run correctly. I wouldn't worry about Jerry Jeudy, but I am interested in Harold Fannin because this is exactly the type of receiver that Dylan Gabriel needs. Someone who is big and tall and easy to see and doesn't run too far down the field. Look, honestly, this is the way the offense is going to run. It's going to be very different than with Joe Flacco. It's not going to be the outside receivers. It's going to be the tight ends. And now the tight end, because if Njoku actually misses this coming week, yeah, Fannin is definitely going to be a pretty strong streaming candidate. Now, if you're needing help at running back, maybe you miss out on Vidal or you just don't want to spend up for him, don't worry. Have a player, honestly, I think you can come back to. A lot of players might have dropped Woody Marks, and I am still kind of in on him, at least this week. I know I am. Let me tell you why. Now, I know this feels like it was fool's gold, right? He had that one big game where, like, that's it. It's the takeover. He's the guy, and he wasn't the guy, right? Nick Chubb then all of a sudden not only outproduced, but out-carried him the following week, and Marks pretty much did nothing. A lot of people even asked, can I just drop Woody Marks? No, don't drop Woody Marks unless there's clearly a better option out there in waivers, but now I'm going to tell you, if he's out there, I would go ahead and scoop him up. So besides the letdown game and then the bye, and Nick Chubb still being there and apparently being the lead back, you've also probably heard that the coaching staff themselves in Houston have said they view him as a passing down back. And that means, yes, Nick Chubb is gonna still be involved. Woody Marks is not taking over this backfield. Okay, yeah, that definitely caps his upside. But this week, it's actually a good thing. Hear me out. They happen to be winning big against Baltimore because Baltimore doesn't know how to score anymore. Lamar Jackson being out kind of hurts. So with that, yeah, they were front runners there. Chubb was just going to carry the ball. They didn't need to pass it to the running back a whole lot. They just didn't need to pass it much in general. It was pretty easy for them, all right? It's going to be different in week 7 because, well, they're going to face Seattle. So first of all, Seattle actually can sort of score, unlike the Cooper Rush-led Ravens. So it's going to be a close game, but here's the thing with Seattle. They have a very specific philosophy on defense, and this has continued. As of right now, Seattle's defense is allowing the fewest yards per carry to running backs. They are stuffing the inside run, especially. But the same Seattle defense has allowed by far the most receptions to running backs, right? So they're doing this on purpose, right? They're trying to stop the interior, right? They're playing pretty tight in general, at least before all the secondary injuries against wide receivers. They're giving up the soft stuff in the middle of the field, tight ends, and those dump offs to running backs. And this is where Woody Marks not only excels, but this is where he's going to be used. So unless somehow Houston happens to get up by multiple scores early, which I don't anticipate, I think we're going to see more Woody Marks than Nick Chubb, and I think Woody Marks could be effective once again. What if you need a quarterback this week? You're streaming or you happen to have Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and yeah, those are the two teams on bye. It's Buffalo and Baltimore. All right, well, it's not really great out there as far as the schedule goes. I try to find guys who have good matchups, but also some upside in fantasy. I had to be talked down from Spencer Rattler. I know they play the Bears, but still, okay, fine. How about Trevor Lawrence this week? Now, Trevor Lawrence is usually kind of the epitome of mid as far as fantasy numbers go. Never the worst, never the best quarterback. Doesn't have big games unless they happen to be playing from behind in that garbage time. But they haven't really done that this year. Jacksonville's actually winning. That defense is pretty good. They're taking the ball away more than every other team. And so there hasn't been as much volume for Trevor Lawrence, and especially that second half garbage time, which Bryce Young basically feasts on. Now, I'm not saying there's going to be that this week when they play the Rams, but I will say this, at least it should be a competitive game, especially hopefully if Puka plays. They're going to need to kind of keep the foot on the gas here. They're going to have to throw it plenty. And the Rams, you look at it, and they're right now 10th toughest against quarterbacks in terms of fantasy points allowed. That's extremely misleading. This is all about kind of that small sample and the competition they've faced. So far, the Rams, in their 6 games played, look, week 1, they got C.J. Stroud, that Texans offense that was the worst in the entire NFL for the first couple of weeks of the season. Remember that. Week 2, they got to play Cam Ward in his second game ever, and that Titans offense, which now still looks like the worst in the NFL. They just got the benefit of playing Cooper Rush / Tyler Huntley. Yeah, the numbers are skewed here. The quarterback that is at the most passing yards against the Rams is pocket passer Mac Jones. But Mac Jones threw for 342 yards against the Rams. Look, the Rams defense isn't bad. It's a decent pass defense. They got a pass rush at least. The secondary, is kind of hit or miss, but again, they're definitely not nearly as good as the stats would suggest. So Trevor Lawrence could be perfectly serviceable here. I'm not claiming there's a huge ceiling or anything, but honestly, if I look at the rest of the streaming options out there at quarterback, there's none I like better. And I know that this game is in London for Jacksonville, and things always get weird in those international games, sometimes very low scoring like the one we just saw. But remember, Jacksonville, this is fine. They played last year in London twice. And that very same forgettable London game, the Jets, I know. At this point, you're like, why do I want anything remotely connected to this offense? Keep in mind, Denver has a really good defense, and yet Justin Fields was really bad. But you can't just completely give up on a team. Remember just a couple of weeks ago, the Atlanta Falcons were shut out by Carolina, and then the very next week they put up 34 points. Well, I definitely don't expect that from the Jets. I will say, don't just completely give up on Mason Taylor. I get it. He did nothing. You picked him up. It was bad. Now, did say he was a strong pickup. Did also warn against playing him in this matchup. It wasn't good. It's not good for tight ends to play Denver. And it was all bad, right? Again, I'm not making excuses for the Jets in any way. But you can't give up on Mason Taylor because things will get better. In fact, they almost have to get better. The next 2 weeks, they have Carolina, Cincinnati, not just not great defenses, but they happen to be the two worst against tight ends in terms of fantasy points allowed. And that has been consistent this season and also going back to last season. Like, I don't feel like Garrett Wilson's dealing with a serious injury, but what if Garrett Wilson is limited or out? I mean, really, are we going to see Josh Reynolds get 10 targets? I don't think so. I really hope not. I'm just going to trust Mason Taylor is going to be the guy there for the Jets. An offense that just keeps rolling as the season goes on. It's the Indianapolis Colts. But one thing we didn't expect is now all of a sudden Josh Downs has become the leading target. Now, I could have talked about Josh Downs last week and said, no, there's just not enough meat on the bone here, right? He's not getting in the end zone. He's got such a low yard per reception average, and it's still low. I mean, single digits. You don't want that for a wide receiver, at least not for fantasy. And they've got good other options, right? You got JT near the goal line. They've got, of course, Daniel Jones runs it in, Michael Pittman. And then Alec Pierce was coming back. Yeah, he missed a week with a concussion. A.D. Mitchell with kind of like that soft unwritten suspension. Well, guess what? A.D. Mitchell is still not coming back. He was a healthy scratch this week. Alec Pierce was back, but he didn't do anything. And meanwhile, for the second week in a row, Josh Downs led all wide receivers in receiving and in targets. In fact, he was only behind Tyler Warren this week in total targets. But last week, he was the leader on the team in targets. Maybe now the Daniel Jones, Josh Downs connection that we thought was going to be a thing, now is maybe becoming a thing. And Downs actually did hit pay dirt too, his first touchdown of the season. Now, that still doesn't give you the warm fuzzy to get a receiver who, despite all the catches, is a long reception of 11 yards on the day. He's just not going to be used downfield, right? That's not what he does. That's what Alec Pierce does, right? They're using Tyler Warren. And so the ceiling, again, is going to be capped here in this offense. But again, you're looking for a floor. At least now Downs in PPR leagues has got it. And I know this is getting deep, but look, if Puka does miss, someone is going to have to step up. They're going to have to throw it to someone who isn't just Devontae Adams in that Rams offense. And so I present to you Jordan Whittington. Now, keep in mind, besides Puka, Tutu Atwell also left the game with a hamstring injury. Good chance he doesn't play in London. And so why Whittington? Well, in this game, which Puka missed, a good chunk of, Whittington led the team in snaps, and he was second in targets. There wasn't big-time production here, but again, if they're preparing this week and assuming Puka doesn't go, I think we could see, by design, more throws to Whittington. I'm not telling you he's the ideal Puka Nacua replacement, but we've gone down the list here. If all these receivers I've talked about are still unavailable and you're hurting, you might want to take a shot on Whittington. All right, that's this week's waiver wire list. Don't forget, we've got start sit. We got everything you need to win. It's going to be right here in this week's playlist.